I want you to just take a second and imagine something for me.
Okay, setting a scene. I'm ready.
Right. So picture that intense, just bone-deep exhaustion of bringing a new baby into the world. You are running on maybe 2 hours of completely fractured sleep.
If you're lucky, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. Your body is totally depleted, and the sheer weight of this massive new responsibility is just sitting squarely on your shoulders.
It's an incredibly vulnerable state to be in.
It really is. You're doing your absolute best to just keep this tiny, fragile human safe. And then, out of nowhere, you're suddenly hit by a terrifying, completely uninvited thought.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a thought about something horrible happening to that baby, a thought so dark, so disturbing that it literally takes your breath away.
And that usually triggers immediate panic, right?
Complete panic, just this crushing wave of terror, which is almost instantly followed by an intense, isolating shame. You're sitting there in the dark nursery thinking, what kind of monster has a thought like that?
It is profoundly terrifying. And because of the violent or disturbing nature of those thoughts, it's an experience that almost always happens in complete isolation.
People are just too scared to say it out loud.
Exactly. They're absolutely terrified to speak those thoughts out. I mean, sometimes even to their own partners.
And that isolation, that silence, is exactly why we are dedicating today's deep dive to this specific experience.
It's so necessary.
It really is. We are pulling from the clinical insights and the operational framework of coping and healing counseling, or CHC.
Right, the telehealth practice.
Yeah, they're based out of Georgia, and their clinical notes give us this incredibly clear window into a condition that is deeply stigmatized, widely misunderstood, and this is the core mission for today, highly treatable.
Highly tradable. That's the key part to remember.
So we are talking about perinatal OCD. Okay, let's unpack this, because we really need to approach this with zero judgment, absolute compassion, and, a lot of intellectual curiosity.
I agree completely. Starting from a place of compassion is just, well, it's essential here.
Because we want to give you, the listener, the tools to actually understand a very sensitive reality.
Right. Because the very first thing we have to establish, based on the clinical insights we're looking at, is the true nature of these thoughts.
The intrusive ones.
Yes, during pregnancy and after birth, experiencing intrusive, unwanted, scary thoughts is like a hallmark symptom of perinatal OCD.
There's a big distinction there.
A massive one. The defining characteristic, the thing that separates an intrusive thought from a genuine intention, is that these thoughts are ego-dystonic.
Okay, let me stop you right there for a second. Ego-dystonic is a pretty clinical term.
True. Yeah, it is.
In plain English, the source material puts a massive, bold underline beneath one very specific point. These thoughts are not desires.
Not at all. They are the exact opposite of a desire.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is, well, it's the core paradox of how the brain is actually reacting.
Tell me more about that paradox.
So the clinical consensus shows that these thoughts horrify the parent precisely because they clash so violently with how deeply they love their child.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It's an alarm system.
Yes, it is essentially a misfiring alarm system. The brain is trying its absolute hardest to protect the baby by scanning the environment for threats.
But it goes into overdrive.
Exactly. In a highly anxious, sleep-deprived state, that alarm system just gets stuck in the on position.
Like it can't turn off.
Right. It starts throwing out these worst-case horrific scenarios just to keep you on your toes. So the horror the parent feels when they have the thought is actually proof of their protective instinct, not a lack of it.
I was trying to think of how to visualize that misfiring alarm, and the best analogy I could come up with is that these intrusive thoughts are basically like malicious pop-up ads on a computer.
Oh, I like that analogy.
The ones you're just trying to read an article, or in this case, just trying to feed your baby, and suddenly this graphic, horrifying pop-up ad takes over the whole screen.
And you definitely didn't search for it.
No. You didn't search for it, you don't want it there, but the harder you frantically try to click the little X to close it, the more aggressively those pop-ups multiply.
Yes, until your whole system just freezes up.
Exactly.
That captures the mechanical loop of OCD perfectly. The attempt to suppress or fight the thought, frantically clicking the X, right, actually signals to the amygdala that this thought is a massive threat.
The amygdala is the fear center of the brain, right?
Right, so the brain thinks, wow, we are reacting very strongly to this scenario. We need to send more of these thoughts to make sure we stay alert.
So you accidentally feed the loop by trying to destroy it.
You do. You get trapped in it.
But if we know that mechanically, it leads me to something I'm really trying to, wrap my head around.
What's that?
If these thoughts are completely contrary to who the person is, if they're just biological pop-up ads, Why do they feel so visceral?
Ah, I see what you mean.
Like, why do they cause such immediate silencing shame right in the moment?
Well, because the human brain doesn't easily distinguish between a perceived psychological threat and a real physical one.
Especially not when you're already exhausted.
Exactly. Especially during moments of high anxiety. The physical reaction is very real. Your heart races, cortisol floods your system.
You get that pit of dread in your stomach.
Right. So the parent feels this intense physiological terror, and they mistakenly attribute that terror to their own character.
They internalize it.
They do. They assume if I'm feeling this deeply disturbed by a thought in my own head, it must mean there is something fundamentally broken or dangerous about me.
Which brings us right to the ultimate fear, I think. The shame is rooted in the parent asking themselves, am I a danger to my baby?
That is the core fear, yes.
And that transitions us to the most vital clinical line drawn in our source material today. The CHC notes are incredibly firm on this distinction, and we need to be too.
Yes, this is arguably the most urgent clarification in all their resources.
Yeah.
Perinatal OCD is fundamentally different from postpartum psychosis.
Fundamentally different.
Yes. Having perinatal OCD does not make you a danger to your baby, period.
That is so important to emphasize.
They are entirely different clinical profiles. Postpartum psychosis involves a break from reality.
Like hallucinations.
Right. Hallucinations, delusions, and a total loss of insight. But in perinatal OCD, insight is completely intact.
They know the thought is weird.
Exactly. The parent knows the thought is bizarre and terrifying, which is exactly why it causes them so much distress.
That distinction needs to be broadcast on a megaphone, honestly. Perinatal OCD does not equate to being dangerous.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how the fear of being labeled dangerous or psychotic is the primary mechanism that keeps parents silent.
They think someone will take their baby away.
That's their biggest nightmare. They're terrified that if they admit they're having intrusive thoughts about, say, dropping the baby down the stairs, someone is going to call Child Protective Services.
They just suffer alone.
Right. But when a parent understands that OCD is an anxiety-based response, just an overactive, misfiring protective mechanism, it completely shifts the paradigm.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Looking at the clinical outcomes, it seems like the silence itself is the actual enemy here.
It is the fuel for the fire.
Yeah, the silence is what gives the OCD its power to multiply those pop-up ads. So my question is, by simply learning the clinical difference between OCD and psychosis, does that act alone begin to defang the intrusive thoughts?
Oh, absolutely it does. Knowledge in this specific instance isn't just educational. It's incredibly therapeutic.
Because it removes the shame.
Yes. When you realize that you are experiencing an anxiety spike rather than a break from reality, you immediately strip away that layer of secondary trauma.
Meaning the belief that you're a monster.
Exactly. You still have to deal with the anxiety of the OCD, sure, but you are no longer fighting the false, devastating belief that you're a bad person.
That cognitive shift is huge.
It's the mandatory foundation of any real recovery.
Which brings us from the problem directly to the solution. Because as the CHC source material heavily emphasizes, perinatal OCD is highly treatable.
Very treatable. You don't have to live like this.
Right. You are not facing a life sentence of enduring these horrifying pop-up ads in your brain. But I kind of want to get into the weeds of how this actually works.
Let's do it. The clinical framework highlights very specific evidence-based approaches to this.
They mention ERP and CBT, right?
Yes. Specifically ERP, which stands for Exposure and Response Prevention, and CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy.
How do those work in practice?
Well, it's important to note that these are not just spaces to, vent about feeling sad or overwhelmed.
It's not just talk therapy.
Right. A licensed clinician uses these modalities to help the parent truly understand the mechanics of what they're experiencing, and then they build a highly structured plan to dismantle the OCD loop.
Structuring a plan. That makes me think of it like physical therapy, but for the brain.
That's a really good way to look at it.
Like, if you have a torn ligament in your knee, you don't just sit in a chair, yell at your knee to stop hurting, and hope the pain magically disappears.
That would never work.
No. You go to a specialist and you do very specific, guided, and frankly uncomfortable exercises to rebuild the strength and flexibility of that joint. ERP and CBT sound exactly like that. You are actively retraining the brain's alarm system.
The physical therapy analogy works, but let's take it a step further. Imagine doing physical therapy while your muscle is actively having a severe spasm.
Ouch. That sounds intense.
That's what ERP feels like initially. In ERP, the exercises involve slowly, methodically habituating the brain to the presence of the anxiety without engaging in the compulsive behaviors that keep the loop going.
Wait, before we get too deep into the clinical theory, I'm still stuck on the sleep-deprived parent.
Fair enough.
Like, what does a customized ERP plan actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon when you're alone with a crying infant?
It has to be practical, yeah.
How does a clinician customize this so it doesn't just feel like a mountain of extra homework for someone who can barely keep their eyes open?
That is a great question. Let's walk through a hypothetical scenario based on the clinical principles.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say a parent's intrusive thought triggers every time they walk past the staircase with the baby. The fear is falling or somehow dropping the child.
A very common fear.
Right. So the compulsion, the thing they do to temporarily relieve the anxiety, might be avoiding the stairs entirely or gripping the baby so hard it's uncomfortable.
We're mental compulsions, right?
Exactly. Mental reassurances, like repeating, I am a good parent, I am a good parent, over and over in their head.
Okay, so the brain learns that the only way to survive the stairs is to do those specific compulsions.
Precisely. So what the therapist does in an ERP plan is break that association down into tiny, manageable steps.
Like what?
It might start with just standing 10 feet away from the stairs with the baby and sitting with the anxiety for 2 minutes, resisting the urge to chant the mental reassurance.
Just feeling the fear, but not reacting.
Right. They're teaching the brain, look, we feel anxious, but we didn't do the compulsion, and the baby is still perfectly safe.
And then they gradually get closer.
Yes. Over time, they move closer to the stairs. The clinician customizes it by integrating these tiny exposures into the parent's actual daily routine, so it's not extra work. It's just a slight modification of what they were already doing.
But that brings up a really massive practical hurdle.
Which is?
Traditional clinics expect you to drive to an office, sit on a couch, and talk about the stairs, but the stairs are at your house.
Yes.
This feels like the exact friction point where traditional healthcare models fail new parents.
This raises an important question about systemic barriers to maternal mental health care. Because treatment is only effective if the patient can actually access it, sustain it, and apply it to their real environment.
Which is hard when you have a newborn.
Exactly. And it's precisely why the operational model of a practice like coping and healing counseling is so noteworthy as a case study here.
Right. Let's look at how CHC structurally solves this roadblock, because their model seems engineered from the ground up to remove friction.
They've been very intentional about it.
First of all, they are 100% telehealth, and they serve all 159 counties in Georgia.
Which is huge. Historically, your access to specialized psychiatric care for something complex like perinatal OCD was entirely dictated by your zip code.
Like if you lived in a city, you were fine.
Right. If you lived in a major urban center like Atlanta, maybe you had options. If you lived in a rural county, you were on an island. By operating a telehealth model across every single county in the state, CHC effectively dismantles that geographical barrier.
But there's a clinical advantage here too, right? Going back to our stairs example, doing ERP via telehealth seem structurally superior for this specific demographic.
Oh, it is a massive clinical advantage. Think about it. The therapist can literally be on a video call with the mother while she's standing in her own kitchen or standing near her own staircase.
The exact environment where her triggers exist.
Right. They can guide her through the exposure in real time, in her real life, rather than asking her to imagine the stairs while sitting in a sterile office 30 miles away.
That makes total sense. It bridges the gap between theory and practice perfectly.
It really does.
And it's not just a solo practitioner trying to manage all this. Looking at their structural notes, they boast a really diverse team of over 15 licensed therapists.
Yes, they have quite a team.
They have licensed clinical social workers, professional counselors, marriage and family therapists.
Having that culturally competent, multidisciplinary team is absolutely critical.
Why is that variety so important?
Well, because perinatal mental health ripples outward. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It deeply impacts the marriage. It shifts family dynamics. It can trigger past trauma or complicate the grief of previous miscarriages.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about the broader impact.
Yeah, my mother might come into CHC seeking help for intrusive thoughts. But the clinical team might realize that to fully support her, they also need to provide couples therapy to help the partner understand what's happening.
Or family therapy, maybe?
Exactly. Or even helping with teenagers, since they treat ages 13 and up for anxiety, depression, PTSD, grief, stress. They have the internal infrastructure to treat the whole system, not just the isolated symptom.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and analyze this operational model, it's not just convenient, it's a structural lifeline.
A lifeline is the perfect word for it.
Think about the physical reality of a new parent. If you are struggling with terrifying, intrusive thoughts, the absolute last thing you are physically or emotionally capable of doing is packing a heavy diaper bag.
Perfectly timing a feeding.
Right. Buckling a crying baby into a car seat, driving 45 minutes in traffic, and then sitting in a waiting room full of strangers. With this 100% telehealth model, they just have to open a laptop in their living room.
You are removing the logistical nightmare that prevents exhausted people from seeking care in the first place. But geography and logistics are only two parts of the systemic barrier.
There's another wall.
The third, and often the most insurmountable wall in the American healthcare system, is financial.
Yes. The cost.
Private insurance often gatekeeps specialized maternal mental health behind massive deductibles or out-of-network fees.
I was looking at their financial structure, and it is a fascinating counterexample to how the industry usually operates.
They've addressed financial access head-on.
They really have. They work with the major private providers, Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, Humana.
And they've structured it so those sessions range from a $10 to $40 copay.
Which is incredibly reasonable. But the thing that actually stopped me in my tracks was their Medicaid structure.
Yes, that's the real game changer.
If a patient is on Medicaid in Georgia, receiving care through CHC is a $0 copay.
$0.
Let me just repeat that for emphasis. A $0 copay for Medicaid patients to receive specialized evidence-based therapy.
When you combine the telehealth delivery across the entire state with that specific level of insurance accessibility, you are fundamentally changing the landscape of who gets to heal.
You're removing the gatekeeping.
Exactly. A $0 copay for Medicaid removes the economic gatekeeping that so often prevents vulnerable, low-income populations from receiving highly specialized therapies like ERP and CBT.
It makes it a reality for everybody.
It means that getting evidence-based help is no longer a luxury reserved for the few who can afford out-of-pocket boutique care. It becomes an accessible reality for the many. It's just a brilliant operational solution to a massive public health gap.
It really is a profoundly validating structure of care. They built a system that essentially says, we know you are overwhelmed, so we are going to make it as easy as humanly possible for you to reach us.
We meet you where you are.
Exactly. Which brings us right back to the core message that we found in the very beginning of these clinical notes. We want to take a moment to look right at you, the listener, and remind you of the most empathetic truth we can pull from this entire deep dive.
This is the most important part.
If you are experiencing these intrusive, scary thoughts, you are not a bad parent. You are simply a struggling parent who deserves support. And most importantly, you do not have to carry this alone.
That is the essential takeaway.
Yeah.
This is a recognized, heavily studied, and highly treatable condition. It does not define your character, does not mean you are dangerous, and the mechanisms to help you dismantle those thoughts are literally just a click or a phone call away.
And for those who are in Georgia or maybe know someone in Georgia and want to explore those mechanisms, the contact information for coping and healing counseling is right there. You can reach their team at 448320102.
Or visit them online, right?
Yep, you can visit them online at chectherapy.com, or you can email them directly at support@chctherapy.com.
Having those resources at your fingertips is vital, whether it's for yourself or perhaps for a friend or family member who recently had a child and might be quietly struggling behind closed doors.
That's a great point. You never really know what someone is going through. Well, we've covered an immense amount of ground today. We've explored the terrifying paradox of a misfiring brain alarm system. We've drawn a hard clinical line between OCD and psychosis.
A very necessary line.
And we've analyzed how modern telehealth can dismantle the geographical and financial roadblocks to psychiatric care. But as we wrap up, there's one lingering detail from the source material that I can't quite shake.
What is that?
The notes explicitly state that perinatal OCD is, well, more common than most people realize.
Oh, it is incredibly common. The rates of perinatal anxiety and OCD are significant, yet the stigma we discussed earlier keeps it completely buried in the shadows. It is basically an epidemic of silence.
An epidemic of silence. That leaves us with a final thought I want to offer you, the listener, to really mull over long after this deep dive ends.
It's a heavy thought.
It is. If this condition truly is so common, yet so intensely unspoken, how many generations of parents before us have suffered in complete and total
It's
silence?
heartbreaking to think about.
Think about the millions of mothers and fathers throughout history who spent their nights agonizing over their own minds simply because they lacked the psychological vocabulary to distinguish an unwanted intrusive thought from a true desire.
The weight of that historical silence is just staggering.
It really is. We encourage you to reflect on how our society supports new parents today, and please share this knowledge. Because simply giving someone the clinical vocabulary to explain their own fear well, that might be the very thing that saves them from the silence.